All right, the comparison between Muhammad and Jesus, this presentation gets into authority, recognition, miracles, deaths, and resurrection. Slide 1. Title: Jesus versus Muhammad, a comparative study. Subtitle: Divinity, Prophethood, Recognition, Miracles, Death, and Resurrection. Visual, optional split background image, Jesus, Muhammad's, and introduce purpose of comparison, sources provided throughout slides. Okay, so I asked ChatGPT to give me what I just read, and then I asked it to give me the sources on where it found it from, and I'm impressed. So slide number 2, divinity and prophethood. Jesus, God in the flesh, the Messiah, Christ, and there's your references. Pretty good, isn't it? Muhammad was a prophet. They say he was the final messenger of God. That's a lie. But there's your references if you want to look it up. Now, last night when I was doing this, I actually crashed ChatGPT. I overloaded it. I asked it to give me the option of putting the cursor over the reference and bringing out the reference, and it actually did. It actually did it, and then it crashed, and it's gone back to not doing that. So it does have limitations. So Jesus' authority was God in the flesh, the Messiah, the Christ. Muhammad was a human prophet, so-called human prophet, and they reckon he was the final messenger of God, which is a lie. Jesus' claims and is recognized as divine. Muhammad explicitly denies divinity. Okay, recognition by others. Jesus was worshipped by the disciples. The demons acknowledged him as the Son of the Most High God. They knew he was divine. Muhammad, he was obeyed by followers, never worshipped. His authority was acknowledged, which could be the same for any commander or chief. There's the references for the Jesus statement, Mark 5:7, etc. And there's the Quran for Muhammad's stuff. The key point is Jesus is worshipped and acknowledged by supernatural beings. Muhammad is obeyed but never worshipped. Miracles: healing, exorcisms, raising the dead, controlling nature. As for Muhammad, Quran is miracle, minor hadith miracles, the moon splitting, which is not real, and water from fingers, which again is not real. But there's the references. You can decide on that yourself. Jesus' miracles are physical, public, and immediate. Muhammad's miracles are textual, Quranic, plus limited to hadith miracles. Death. Jesus was crucified and his resurrection is central to the crucifixion. Muhammad was murdered or assassinated by poisoning at Kaaba, and the lingering effects of this poisoning did cause his death. When he was dying, he said that he felt like his aorta was being cut. But there's also a prophecy that was given where it said, if Muhammad lies, Allah will cut his aorta. So maybe Muhammad was making a confession about some of his lies when he was dying. And there's the references for that. Look, the key point is Jesus' death is public, judicial, and followed by a resurrection. Muhammad's death is murder via deliberate poisoning. And the sad news for Muhammad was it was a Jewish woman that did it. If we look at the resurrection, Jesus' bodily resurrection happened on the third day. No resurrection reported for Muhammad. The witnesses were Mary Magdalene and other women in those references. The 11 disciples, 500 people at once at Corinth. Did you know 500 people at once at Corinth saw Jesus after he rose from the dead? Yeah. And then you have Paul or Saul when he was confronted. And there's a reference in 1 Corinthians 15:8 to that as well. Here's some other references as well. The key points: Jesus appeared to multiple witnesses post-resurrection, providing verification. Muhammad had no resurrection. Okay. The legacy: followers worship him. Divinity claim spreads worldwide. For Muhammad, followers obey him. Prophethood and political moral authority continue. References: early church writings and the Nicene Creed. You have the historical records of Muslim chronicles for that. But the key point is, Jesus' post-death influence is religious worship and peace. Muhammad is obedience and political religious authority. And that has all gone wonky because Muhammad wanted wars and things. And so they actually wanted the infidels dead. And they still carry that out, but this isn't the point of the crux of this. Okay, divinity and prophethood. Jesus was God in the flesh, the Messiah, the Christ. Muhammad was a human prophet. They say he was the final messenger, but he wasn't. Recognition, worship, and where are we? Back at this? No, this is video 8. Worship, demons acknowledge the Son of God, the Most High. Muhammad was never worshipped. There's the miracles. His death and resurrection was central to his death. Muhammad was murdered by poisoning. Jesus was resurrected. Muhammad was not. Witnesses saw him. Muhammad was never seen again. So there's some variations and things. We might just have a quick look, we've got time, at the aorta prophecy warning Muhammad not to lie and how that lines up. So in the Quran 69:44 through 46, there's a conditional statement, and it says, if Muhammad were to fabricate revelation, Allah would seize him and cut his aorta. Now it says it is a hypothetical threat, not a report of an event. Now, as we know, the things of the spirit work in mysterious ways, but this is what happened when we get Muhammad's aorta comments from the Sahih al-Bukhari near his death. Muhammad says, he still felt the pain from the poison at Kaaba, and that it felt as though, and this is Muhammad speaking, my aorta is being cut. Now, of all the things he could have said, I think that's a confession that a lot of what he said, or most of what he said, or possibly all of what he said, were lies. They weren't true revelations at all. Because he was warned if he fabricated revelation, according to these writings in the Quran, that Allah would seize him and cut his aorta. And here he's saying, I feel as though my aorta is being cut, which is saying I feel like I'm under the judgment of Allah for what I've done. To me, that's a confession. It's a description of physical suffering attributed to poison, not to Allah, but I mean, Allah allows all things to happen. And given, if you look at, and we'll have a quick look at Muhammad's life, it's saying it's not framed as judgment or confession in this context, but I argue that. And let's just see if we can dig a bit deeper. Now, many of you may or may not have heard of the satanic verses from Muhammad. Muhammad's alleged false or retracted revelations from early Islamic sources. So he did have false revelations, which brings us back to, was there some kind of supernatural curse taking place relative to Muhammad's lies? Now, the satanic verses incident, what is it? Early biographies report Muhammad recited verses praising pagan goddesses. Okay? Later he retracted them, saying Satan had put the words on his tongue. We'll come back to Muhammad and Satan in a minute. Now, this is accepted by many early historians. Of course, it's rejected by latter Islamic orthodoxy. It's not in the Quran. Even when accepted, Islam says it was interference, not deliberate lying. There's something here about abrogated verses. Verses revealed, then later cancelled or replaced by new revelations. So they cut it out later. And then you have examples of things in the Quran. The problem raises the question, if earlier revelations were from God, why were they wrong enough to be cancelled? That's a good question. That's from ChatGTP 5.2. That's a very good question. Okay, this is the problem. If the earlier revelations were from God, as they claim to be, why were they wrong enough to be cancelled? I thought ChatGTP did a really good job with that. Okay, so this is interesting because some of these platforms can protect certain narratives on and be partial on different religions and things, particularly I've found with Islam. But here it says, and this is about abrogated verses revealed, then later cancelled or replaced by new revelations, which is common amongst cults. Particularly the Jehovah's Witnesses are notorious for it. Here's some examples. Peace versus fighting, or terrorism versus. Later verses override earlier tolerance. Alcohol progression, allowed, discouraged, forbidden. It's okay. Prayer direction changed from Jerusalem to Mecca. There's an interesting one. I bet a lot of the Muslims didn't know that they prayed towards Jerusalem at the start. And what you got to remember is, and we'll look at it, Muhammad was rejected as a preacher because of his pagan ideas, and the Jews wouldn't accept what he was saying, and the Christians certainly wouldn't. Here's some sources that explicitly allows abrogation or illegitimate change. The Quran 2:106. Now here's the verse justifying changing what apparently is supposed to be Allah's revelation through Muhammad. If we ever abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, if we just delete it, we replace it with a better or similar one. This is human people deciding to do this. Do you not know that Allah is most capable of everything? Well, let's just blame Allah. That's what they're saying. They're changing things to whatever they want and saying Allah is giving them permission to do that. There's a problem. It raises the question, if earlier revelations were from God, why were they wrong enough to need cancellation? So let's look at the convenient revelations. Revelations, what is it? Revelations that appear to solve Muhammad's personal political problems. Examples, marriage to Zainab, exemptions for Muhammad not granted to others, rebuked, removed, or softened by later revelation. So what's it saying is it's been manipulated to suit the narrative of the people that are interfering with it. It's interference. It takes away the legitimacy. Now you can look at the Quran itself. Aisha, this is the 6-year-old that Muhammad decided to make his wife, reportedly said, "I feel your Lord hastens to fulfill your wishes." And Aisha was raped by Muhammad the pedophile when she was 9 to consummate his marriage. Criticism. Looks like situational revelation, not timeless decree. In other words, it's stuff just being made up by people to suit. And as I said before, the Jehovah's Witnesses are notorious for this. Contradictions with earlier scripture. What is it? Quran claims to confirm Torah and Gospel, but contradicts them on theology and history. What you've got to understand is Muhammad was rejected by the Christians and the Jews. And that's what caused him to start this tyrannical cult. It was never about peace. Muhammad instigated 27 terrorism attacks, invasions. Now, here's some examples. The Quran's denial of Jesus' crucifixion. So that immediately illegitimizes the book. Different Abraham-Ishmael narrative. Because what they did, they plagiarized a lot from the Torah and the Old Testament and the New Testament writings, but they just buggered it all up. And they do this again. One comes to mind, the JWs, the Jehovah's Witnesses. So it's just another cult and the redefinition of biblical figures. Now the problem, either earlier scriptures were corrupted, Islamic claim, not manuscript evidence, or Quran is revising history, which completely illegitimizes the whole text, which means it's just falsehood, can't be trusted. Now the aorta problem, contextual, not a confession, apparently. Quran 69:44-46 threatens a false prophet with aorta cutting, and we might look at that. Okay, so it says in the Quran 69:44-46, had the Muhammad, the messenger, made up something in our name, made up a lie, we would have certainly seized him by his right hand and then severed his aorta. Remember Muhammad when he was dying in his final hours and days, Muhammad later says near death it felt as if his aorta were being cut. Now you take out of that what you will, but that seems like his lies actually came against him. Islam does not connect these. Critics argue the overlap is disturbing, and it is disturbing at the least. What Islam itself admits, revelation can be abrogated or deleted. Satan can interfere. We better look at the Quran 22:52. Now this is an interesting, as far as I'm concerned, way of justifying the deletion and change of the original passages. And we did not send before you any messenger or prophet except that when he spoke or recited, Satan threw into it. Right? And then they put in brackets some misunderstanding which is added. But Allah abolishes that which Satan throws in. And then Allah makes precise his verses. Allah is knowing and wise. That's just excuses for made-up rhetoric. Muhammad could be corrected by later revelation. Verses could be withdrawn. Well, that's just not how you play the game for authenticity and authority. So there's no authenticity or authority in this book because it's been mingled, jungled, jangled, and twisted and turned to suit those who translated it at that time. What Islam does not admit, that Muhammad knowingly lied, that any false verse remained in the Quran, they took them out, and that Allah carried out judgment on him. That's what they don't admit. And I find that ChatGPT's been pretty good here because it says that Allah carried out judgment on him. That's interesting, isn't it? So the bottom line, there are documented retractions, cancellations, and corrections. Earlier sources report at least one serious incident of false recitation. Later theology works hard to contain the damage. Whether this disqualifies Muhammad as a prophet is a judgmental call, but it does under all principles of authenticity and authority. But pretending these issues don't exist is historically dishonest, and that's what the Muslims do. We want more information on this. Just a little example of how this works. I find it brilliant because when you do your study and you come back and you get information given to you really quick like this, it's a very handy thing. The claim being examined, Allah carried out judgment on Muhammad. It is not stated specifically anywhere in Islam scripture. There is no verse, hadith, or tafsir that explicitly says Allah judged or punished Muhammad. So if someone makes that claim, it must be an inference, not a quotation. But what the Quran actually provides is this. In Quran 69:44 through 46, the aorta warning, and this is the conditional structure, that if Muhammad fabricated revelation, then Allah would seize him and cut his aorta. But the Quran does not say the fabrication happened and Allah acted on his threat. Well, of course it doesn't, because it would completely disintegrate the religion. Within Islam, the verse is used as a self-authenticating claim, not a prediction. But a conditional threat is not evidence of execution unless the text records fulfillment, and it does not. Now, we'll come back to that because in the Bible, there are curses that came to reality. Muhammad's death statement in the Sa al-Kabari, Muhammad says near death, he still felt pain from the poisoning at Kaaba. It felt as though his aorta was being cut, which means it feels like Allah is putting him out of his misery. And what the hadith does, attributes suffering to poisoning, describes pain, not cause, uses simile, not declaration. And what it does not do is say Allah cut it, says that judgment occurred, and connect the experience to Quran 69. However, does Islam ever interpret this as judgment? No. Across classical tafsir, legal schools, and creedal statements, of course it's not. There is zero Islamic doctrine evidence saying that Allah punished Muhammad, the aorta threat was fulfilled. Well, we know it was fulfilled because Muhammad said that himself, and that his death was validated as his death validated false prophethood. Well, we know he was a false prophet. In fact, the opposite. Of course, it's the opposite because they want to keep the original alive. But where the judgment idea comes in, well, we know where the judgment idea comes in. Quran threatens a false prophet with the aorta cutting. Muhammad later describes death pain using aorta imagery. Therefore, Allah carried out the judgment. So This is the strongest defensible conclusion. This is as far as evidence actually allows. The Quran presents a conditional threat. Muhammad later described extreme pain using similar imagery. Islamic texts do not connect the two, but that's irrelevant. Islam denies divine judgment, but that's irrelevant. And critics infer judgment but cannot prove it textually. That's a lie. That's a lie. You prove it in the man's life. He made the confession himself. Okay? So, again, you've got to be careful. As good as it is, ChatGTP can send you off onto a tangent. So you make up your own mind. I'll end this video now, and I thought this was interesting. There's so much more, but bye for now.